Story of the life and times of Jesus today, and we're going to find out what God can do with just a little bit. What God can do with just a little bit. But to help you get back on track, picture this. The disciples have just returned from their very first mission trip, right? You remember? And you can almost see the highlights and the play-by-play as they came together for the good news of all that had happened from their trip. You could see them, you're like, Jesus, you won't believe it. We did this, and then I said that. You should have seen us. You should have been there, Jesus. You would have been so proud of us. And Jesus did something a little strange. However, he led his disciples to get on a boat and leave. He took them to depart and get away. And of course, he wanted to rest. He wanted to be able to get alone with them and hear their good news indeed. But if you'll remember, he was also grieving. Jesus was grieving. He was grieving the loss of John the Baptist. John the Baptist had been beheaded while they were on this trip. And Jesus is aware that at some point in the midst of all this good news, he's going to have to share the bad news with his disciples that John had been beheaded and was dead. But the crowds, though, figured out where they were going, and they raced ahead of them, remember? And they got there first. So when the boat landed with Jesus and the disciples on it, they were received by this multitude of people that just wanted to get a glimpse of Jesus and probably see a rescue, see a power, see a miracle. They wanted to see something special. They wanted to be able to spectate and watch the things that Jesus was capable of doing. Here's the thing. They may not have realized it, and many of you may not realize it today, but they had the opportunity for rescue. Some of them may not have even known they needed rescuing. But the truth of the fact doesn't change in the reality that Jesus revealed his heart to them and his desire to rescue them, and he does the same thing for us here today. Here's kind of how it worked. The 4 steps of this rescue. Jesus truly saw them. No matter where you are in your life today, Jesus sees you. And in spite of what you may think, when he looks at you and sees you, warts and all, mistakes and problems and all, he still loves you. He saw them and he truly sees us. And he sees us with love in his heart. Because how do we know that? Because he had compassion on them, remember? He had compassion on them. Their needs stirred his heart for them. He was concerned about them. He has compassion and is concerned for us. Right? He welcomed and accepted them just the way they were. Just the way they were. They didn't have to change anything, do anything, be anything. Just exactly the way they showed up that day was the way with which he accepted them. And let me just tell you, he accepts us the same way. Wherever we are in this life, whatever we've done, whatever we are doing, whatever we're planning on doing, whatever we're going to do in the future, Jesus accepts us just the way we are. He has compassion for us. He loves us. His heart is stirred for us. And in that process, he healed them and he'll heal us. Need healing from Jesus today. And some of us often get hung up on the physical side of things, and some of you do need physical healing today, and we've been praying for you. And we're going to keep doing that. Wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to have a service and lay hands and anoint and ask God to heal miraculously, because we believe in that here. We believe that all healing, whether it's miraculous or medicinal, comes from God anyway, so let's ask him. All you can do is tell us yes, wait, or no. But either way, we'll find rescue in him someday, if not immediately. He healed them, he'll heal us. All who accepted it that day received a rescue from Jesus. Is that true? Everybody that day who would allow it to happen was rescued by Jesus Christ. If you're here today in need of rescue and you're willing to accept it, he'll do the same thing for you. Now, you need your Bible. You're going to turn to John 6. We're going to turn to John 6, pick back up in our story. The cool thing about today's story is it's one of 2 events in the life of Jesus that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. Why would that be important? Why would it be important that all 4 Gospel writers recorded this event? They want us to know. There were 2 events in the life of Jesus that they said, you know what, everybody needs to know about this. It was something, and I want to make sure everybody knows. So all 4 guys recorded this story. Now, as I'm prone to do, I'm going to fill in the blanks from the other 3 Gospels. We're going to stay in the book of John in chapter 6. While you're turning there, though, I want you to remember, in expediting the processes we just recounted, Jesus got off the boat, he went up on the mountain a ways, and he started teaching the people, you remember? He created his own amphitheater. They didn't have mics, and they didn't have pews, and they didn't have guitars, but what they did have was love. And so Jesus went partially up the mountain, and he began teaching the apostles and the crowds that had come to hear him, and he taught them all about the kingdom of God. He taught them all about the power that comes when the Spirit of God rests in people and the power of God works through those people to change the world around them. That's an unbelievable power source. That's rescue. And with all that activity, as the day began to wear on, guess what happened? They began to run out of food. I was told this morning that a church which will remain nameless starts earlier. They have Sunday school at 9:30. They start worship at 10:30. They're at the buffet at 11:30, and they get the chicken straight out the grease. They ain't got to wait on it. Are y'all hungry when we get out of here, especially when the preacher, we got a preacher don't know how to shut up sometimes, right? He just keeps talking. And y'all ever, man, it's great. I love what he's talking about, but dadgum, I'm hungry. I need some chicken wings or something, right? Well, the day wore on, the teaching wore on, and all this experience with these crowds wore on, and guess what? They were hungry. They got hungry. And the apostles knew it because they themselves were hungry. But here's the issue. They looked at the crowd and knew they were hungry because they were hungry, and they had to come up with options, right? What are we going to do about these people? Because they must be hungry like we are. So here's what I want you to write down as you go forward today. Hopefully you got one of the sheets as you came in. If not, Buddy will get one to you. But we're going to find out today that in our text, the apostles came up with 4 options with which to meet the needs of the people that were gathered there that day. Okay? 4. Now the first one we're going to hear about in a moment, but before we do, I want to read our text together. We're in chapter 6. We're going to pick back up in verse 5 of John. Jesus asked this to his disciples as they were gathered on this mountain and teaching and looking out. It says the Passover festival was near. We pick up in verse 5. So therefore, when Jesus looked up and noticed a huge crowd coming to him, he asked Philip, where will we buy bread so these people can eat? He asked this to test him, for he himself knew already what he was going to do. And Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? Then Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, so they sat down, and the men numbered about 5,000. And then Jesus took the loaves, and after giving thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also with the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were full, he told his disciples, collect the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. So they collected all of them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces from the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, this is really the prophet, the one who was to come into the world. Therefore, when Jesus knew that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, he himself withdrew again to the mountain by himself. That's the whole story from John's perspective. We're going to fill in some of the gaps from the other 3 gospel writers. In Mark chapter 6, verses 35 and 36, if you're taking notes, we find out this. Remember, they were in the wilderness. There was some grass there, but they were in the wilderness. So they encouraged Jesus, the first option to meet these people's needs. What do you think the first one they said was? Hey, send them away. Send them away. They could go to the surrounding villages and homes and try to seek provisions and lodging. Here's what the disciples are like. You know what? Let's just get rid of the problem. It's not our problem. Let's just pass it on to others. Let's kind of deny that it's a problem. Let's pass it on and allow it to take care of itself. Does that sound like something we do sometimes? Ain't nothing I can do. I know you're hungry. Here's what I'll pray for you. We'll miss you. You ain't got to go home, but you can't stay here, right? What was the first thing they came up with? Well, let's send them away. Let's pass this problem along. Let's pretend like we don't have it. John 6 and 5, which we just read, gives us the second thing. Jesus responded by telling the apostles that they didn't need to send these people away, right? They could feed the hungry crowds themselves. And so he turned to Philip and asked him, let me read it again, where will we buy bread so these people can eat? Now Jesus asked this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. And Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them to have a little. Obviously, Philip, but also the rest of the apostles, were baffled. They're like, what planet is Jesus from? This makes no sense. It's not even mathematically possible. They had nothing to give the people, or at least they thought they did. They also didn't have the 200 days' wages to spare that would be necessary to buy just a taste for each person. Here's what they're saying. You know what? 200 denarii wouldn't even be a mouthful. Y'all know that word, mouthful? Y'all have that? A mouthful. We shortened it into a little phrase in Florida where I'm from. There wouldn't even be enough with 200 denarii worth of bread for a mouthful for everybody there, and 200 denarii is 200 days' wages. If they worked 200 days straight, they wouldn't even have enough bread to give everybody just a smidgen. So they think Jesus' cheese has slid right off the cracker, right? He's lost it. He's crazy. So here's what they come up with in Mark 6, verse 37. Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll raise the funds. We'll have a fundraiser. They counted the cost, right? They decided, well, here's the thing. Somehow or another, money must be the answer. Money must be the answer here. They went from trying to pass the problem off to trying to pay for it. Here's the third option. In the same chapter of Mark 6 and 38, Jesus said this, how much bread do you have? Go look. Now, either he sent them out to find what was available among the multitude or to check their provisions or both, but either way, what they forgot about was that the bread of life was standing right in front of them. The bread of life was the one giving the commands, and he was standing right there. But here's what they saw. They saw resource management. They saw resource management. Number 3, forget about the first two options. Let's just figure out how to work with what we've got. So Andrew found a young man, right, who had how many loaves? How many fish? 2. 5 loaves in this boy's lunch, his sack lunch, which were really nothing more than large crackers. 2 fish, which would have been like salted sardines. Y'all eat sardines? Boy, they good in that mustard, ain't it? But can you imagine trying to feed 5,000 men, not counting women and children, with 2 sardines and 5 crackers? That was what they had to manage among their resources. So Andrew says, but how far will they go among so many? They still don't get it. How would a boy's lunch feed 5,000 men, not counting women and children? So here's what we got. We got 1,000 men per cracker and 2,500 per sardine. They're going to be some hungry folks. That just doesn't make you mad, ain't it? Got your mouth all set for crackers and sardines, and they come around and give you that. Luke 9:13 tells us that they have this resource management idea, and then they come up with a second tier to it. What do we do, Jesus? Do we go buy up enough to make up the difference? Like they have something anyway. Well, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now we only have to spend 198.5 denarii to go get more food. We're laughing, but it sounds like us. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But they referred back to solution number 2. They're still counting the cost. What's the answer? Read between the lines. Somehow or another, money must be the answer to the problem. You see that? We still got to go by the balance. Make up the difference somehow. We got to make up the difference. And then we get to the fourth option that they come up with. They had look here, they'd already forgotten the miraculous powers of Jesus. Where'd they just come back from? They just came back from their first mission trip. What did they do on this mission trip? They healed the sick. They cast out demons. The dead were raised in Jesus. They had the unmitigated power of the Holy Spirit working through them. They worked miracles for those period of weeks while they were gone. They get home and all of a sudden, well, God will do good stuff in Brazil, but he ain't going to do it here. God does great stuff on mission trips, but now we home. You know how many times we come back from a camp experience or a weekend retreat like we're about to have or a mission trip and everything falls back into the same old routine and the pastor just is like, man, well, the leader's just like, and invariably sometime on that trip somebody looks at you and says, you know what? Why can't we do this at home? But then we get back home and we forget, we can do this at home. Jesus had to remind them of who they were dealing with and the powers that are available to an apostle on mission for him. When you're on mission for Jesus, in your house, in your neighborhood, at your school, at your work, in the county, in the state, in the country, around the corner, across the world, the same power of Jesus is available to you. And he will work miracles in and through you if you'll let him. There is rescue coming. But here's what you got to do. Jesus said what? All right, bring me the crackers and the sardines. Bring them to me. Bring me what you got. They were supposed to bring these resources that they had identified to Jesus. Now here's the thing. How many times since you and I and all of us have been together, we're coming up on 3 years in April that we've been doing this together, right? How many times do you suppose I've looked at y'all and said, you know what, maybe in my office, maybe from the sermon, maybe at other times, but I said, you know what, you got to give God something to bless. You got to give God something to bless. Quit sitting on your hands and waiting for it to happen for you. Quit sitting on your hands and waiting for somebody else to do it. Take charge of your own circumstances and give God something to bless. God doesn't really love to make something out of nothing. But he loves to take what you offer him and expand it and make something better out of it. That's your challenge for this week. Now, those of you that have been in our Bible study every Wednesday night, we've already kind of talked about this, but I want y'all to go home and find how many situations where God or Jesus or one of them together did something out of nothing, made something from nothing. See what you find. And then look and see how many times God took the smallest little smidgen, a mustard seed, a rock in a sling, the widow's oil, the widow's mite. You tracking? 12 men, 300 men under Gideon. How many times did God take the smallest little thing and work miracles with it and bring rescue with it? But first you had to give it to him to bless. Give God something to bless. Now, this is pretty cool. He ordered the disciples to do something interesting. Think about how their mindset's working. What's the first thing they're thinking? Well, let's just pass these people off. Second thing, well, let's go try to buy it. Third thing, identify our resources, make up the difference. God says, no, Jesus, give me something to bless and I'll show you what we can do. But before we do that, because of the way your mind works, here's what I want you to do. I want you to divide these men up into groups of how many? 50. Now, they don't even think about the women and children. No offense, ladies and kids, but y'all don't rank. They'd have put y'all in groups of 50 all together and y'all would have ate last. Because the men came first. Back in the day, they got it right. You know the 11th commandment. Boys shall be better than girls. You didn't know that? Just kidding. So the women and children would have been seated separately. But here's the several. Jesus doing this does several things. How many of y'all are logistic administrators? Charlie, you'll love this. How many of y'all are more administrative in your mindset? You're more like details. You make lists. You put things in order. How many of those are in here? Some of y'all do it. You just ain't telling. Y'all telling stories. Okay, here's why Jesus did this. This will make sense. Number one, it made the food distribution more efficient. You got groups of 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. Okay. You got to eat an elephant? Eat it one bite at a time. Break it down into serviceable parts. The second thing it did, it guaranteed that everybody would eat. You got groups of 50, it's much easier to say, okay, who didn't get what they wanted, who hasn't ate yet, who needs it, right? It guaranteed everybody would get food. The third thing it did is it made the veracity of this miracle unquestionable. It made it unquestionable that Jesus worked this miracle that day because it was organized and there wasn't no doubt in it. And here's what I love about it too. How many of y'all get hung up on numbers? Can I just say something to you? This isn't in my notes, but I want to share this with you today. As Christians and as pastors and even here, we sit back and we say, well, you know, numbers don't count. As long as we're doing what God does, I mean, numbers don't count. Then why is there so many numbers in the Bible? Numbers do count. They're not the most important thing, but it matters. What is fruit? What is growth? Is that not numerical? Are we not charged here to grow? And how are we going to see that? Numerically. Duh. It is not the thing, but it's a thing. We should be growing. Who's that on? Let's stop before I get in trouble. But here's what it did. It provided an exact count. Because if you divide everybody up into groups of 50, it's easy to go, right? You remember Schoolhouse Rock? 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 30, right? It's easy to count them. Boom, 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 boom. Add the zeros later. They knew the exact extent of this miracle. They knew how many people Jesus fed when it was all said and done. Does this make sense? Organized people. Jesus loves you too. I don't care much for you. But Jesus is crazy about you note-taking, rule-keeping people. I want to color outside the lines, ain't it? Of course, I'm kidding again. The disciples had defaulted to worldly thinking. So what Jesus did was confirm their failures in heavenly terms. There was going to be no wiggle room in the thought processes when it was all done. It was undebatable. Jesus took that small lunch. He took a sack lunch of 5 crackers and 2 fish. He looked up to heaven with it. And what did he do? He blessed it. Y'all bless your food before you eat it? Yeah? You ever wondered where that came from? Why don't we bless the food before we eat it? Because God gave it to us, and Jesus told us to do that. And there's power in the blessing. There's power in the prayer of blessing. As he blessed the food, he began breaking it into portions. And the portions he gave to his disciples, his apostles, and those apostles' disciples distributed it to the people in these groups of 50. You got a mental picture? You got this big old crowd, 5,000 people plus women and children. Let's just say 10 grand if there was one child, a kid and a half, or whatever. It's probably more than like 15,000, right? And they had them big old families. They had them rabbit families. Who knows how many people were out there on the side of the mountain? But you got thousands of people, more than 5,000 for certain, in groups of 50. Can you see it? You know how I am. I like to visualize things. And Jesus starts breaking that bread, breaking them fish, handing it out to these apostles, and they go 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. And they continue that process until when? Everybody got all they wanted. They got full and ain't want no more. They wanted to know when the cheesecake was coming around. He did it, and he did it all out, ain't it? What did James say? If we're going to do it then, we'll do it big then. Y'all should know about him. He's a Seminole. But Jesus fed them all until they were full. This miracle was complete. The apostles were then commanded to do what? Gather up the leftovers. How many of y'all hate to eat leftovers? There's some folks that just won't do it. I kind of like it. There's some stuff gets better when it's in the fridge a little while. Collard greens get better. Lasagna gets better. Dressing gets better, right? Now hamburgers, not so much. French fries, throw them out. Fried fish, no good. But some stuff gets better when it sits up a little while, ain't it? Why did they collect the leftovers? They going to eat it later? I don't know. Maybe there was a mercy mission down the street. I don't know. Maybe there was a home that could have used it. I don't know, but I know this. There wasn't any waste. I know this. There was no waste. Nothing must be wasted from this miracle. They weren't going to leave a mess, and they weren't going to leave a waste. How much was left? 12 baskets. All right, administrators, managers, number of people. Why 12 baskets? How many disciples were there? Every one of them had to carry a basket of leftovers. What does that do for their mind? Nailing it down. Ain't no wiggle room. You know what has happened because it's right in front of you in an organized fashion to where you cannot miss it. It's not like ants when you crush the mound. This is an organized distribution, a miracle. You know, John 16, 13 through 14 it puts in this interesting verse there. Moses in the Old Testament had predicted the following. He says, look, in Deuteronomy 18:15, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers. You listen to him. What's Moses saying? There's going to come a day when somebody like me comes along. Y'all need to listen to him. God's going to raise him up. And when he shows up, listen to him as much or better than you listen to me. What did Moses do? Did Moses have an experience where he miraculously fed people? What was this manna stuff that fell out of the sky when they were wandering in the wilderness? Moses fed people miraculously, didn't he? There was a pile of them too, and he did it for a long time. They were out there 40 years. So Moses expedited the processes of this manna. Jesus multiplied what people gave him to bless, but both of them fed multitudes miraculously from God. Both of them brought the bread of heaven to people, and both acts were miraculous. We don't have time to go into it today, but that whole manna thing is amazing how that worked. Go read about that this week in your quiet times. But these people testified with their mouths, and we're going to find out they don't mean it next week. They just talking. But they testify with their mouths what? Oh, Jesus was that prophet that was predicted by Moses. This is good. Never be hungry again. We're in the chow line now. I ain't ever got to do nothing. I'm just going to sit back and eat crackers and sardines. Hopefully you'll switch the menu up a little bit. That's a sermon for another day too. And then the people did something interesting. The people tried to take matters into their own hands. Did y'all catch this? Even if they had to make it happen by force, what were they going to do? They were going to grab Jesus up and make him king. Force it on him. Now, let me ask you a question. Did Jesus come to be the king of the world? Well, yeah. So why didn't he just let him? He could have cut out a whole lot of suffering. No nails in the hands, no crown of thorns on the head, no spear in the side, no dying, no people abandoning him. He could have stopped right there and just said, Shazam, I'm king. Let's get it done. Why didn't he do that? Because if he does that, there's no rescue. There's no grace, there's no mercy, there's no salvation. Because it was through the suffering of the servant that we have those things. They thought they wanted Jesus as their king. We're going to find out they really didn't want him as king. But Jesus sensed their intentions, and what did he do? I don't want to say ran away, but he retreated again into a mountain alone. Now, we're going to pick back up there next week with that, or the week after next, with our sermon, so I'm going to stop there with the story. But let me say this. It was going to be up to God, not to the people, to determine when, where, and how Jesus was crowned king of the world, king of the universe. Y'all want to put a bow on this thing and get out of here? How about we do that? Let's see if we can do it fairly quickly. Let me give you several observations that I picked up as I looked through this text today. Now, as I'm leading you through these observations, I want you to understand this is the point in this sermon where if you looked at my notes, it says application. How do I apply this to my independent life? How do I take what Jesus has said to me today and how do I apply it to my individual life in the 21st century? We'll talk about how we do it as a church and as a group in a moment. Right now, this is about you and God, me and God, individually. Here's some observations. Number one, the boy had to share to see the miracle. Little is much, but you got to give a little bit to God. What if that little boy don't offer his lunch? Boy, that's tiny. Now put your glasses on. I can't even see that. The boy had to share. Now, am I saying that the miracle wouldn't have happened if the boy hadn't given his lunch? I'm not saying that, but somebody had to give God something to bless that day. And if the boy hadn't given his lunch, he wouldn't have seen the miracle probably. Another thing, there was an orderly disposition of the miracle. You know, one of the hardest things to do in the modern world is to be careful not to organize your life in such a way to where the organic nature of God leaves you. If you do the same thing every day in exactly the same way over and over and over and over again, you have pretty much organized God right out of your life. You're going through the motions. But at the same time, God gave us times and seasons and stars and moons and suns for us to measure our days, and we are supposed to follow him in an orderly fashion. Is that a fair statement? And it's between every individual and God to figure out how to dispose of their life with him orderly. Because somehow or another, that's where the miracles come. When you figure out how to live before God as an individual and do things the way he wants you to do them, through the organic movement of his Holy Spirit, but in an organized fashion to where you can be efficient, that's where the great miracles of God will come. Thirdly, the prayer of blessing was the power behind the miracle. Y'all caught that, right? Jesus went to blessing, went to breaking the bread, and it began to multiply. Maybe we need to pray more. Maybe you need to pray more. Maybe I need to pray more. Maybe one of the reasons we're not seeing the miraculous works of God and the exponential movement of God, the Fibonacci sequence kinds of movement of God in our life is because we don't pray enough. Maybe we need to organize that into our schedule and dispose of it so that we can see more miracles. Can I tell you another thing too? The world around us is in the wilderness of sin. You know that, right? If we sit on our hands and do nothing, people all around us are going to die and go to hell in their sin because they will not have heard of the wonderful arrangements Jesus made to rescue them from that sin. And let me just tell you, you can sit there and say, well, somebody else will tell them. You can make excuses for not getting involved, for sitting back and waiting on something. Who knows what that is? You figure that out. But I'll tell you this, if you continue on waiting for God and doing nothing and refusing to be used and give God something to bless, let me tell you this, there's blood on your hands. When you stand before God, Ezekiel promises there will be blood on your hands. There'll be blood on the hands for you for the people that didn't hear the message and get to meet Jesus and go to heaven. And there'll be blood on your hands for the people you didn't warn about their lifestyles and behaviors, their attitudes and actions, so that they could get in right relationship with Jesus and live out the same thing you're supposed to be living out. The world around us is the wilderness of sin, but the apostles were the conduit for the miracle. What is it that expedites the miracles of heaven for the people around you that are in the wilderness of sin? You are. How is God going to work miracles for the people in your life who are wandering around blindly and lost? What is it that you give God to? What's the little bit of something you give God to bless? Yourself. What was the conduit for this miracle? The apostles were the conduit. What's a conduit? There's a water bib on the side of the house. The thing you turn the knob and the water spits out. Now, if I want to get that water from that hose bib over to my truck so I can wash it, what do I got to have? A hose. You know what a hose is? It's a conduit. It's a means with which moving something from one location to another location in an orderly fashion so that you can use it. What takes the power of God, the miraculous power from God, from heaven, and sticks it through into the world, sprays it through into the world, distributes it to however you want to picture it. We're the hose that allows the power of God to flow through so that the miracles can come. The apostles were the conduit. This was a tough one. Look at me for a second. So far, we're okay, right? Anybody kind of flipping out? No, most of y'all probably love Jesus. You try your best to share Jesus with the people around you, right? Is that fair? We try our best, right? Here's one thing, don't miss this. What Jesus blesses, he breaks. What does that mean? Reverend Blue over at the Second Baptist in Hartsville put a great thing on his sign one time. He said pretty much, look, how's God going to fill you if you're already full of yourself? You need to be broken before God. Because if you're not broken before him, he can't bless you. And if he's not blessing you, he can't bless others through you. What does it mean to be broken before God? What hope have you got without Jesus? Be honest. There's some talented people in this room that can do some amazing things in and of themselves. And most often we look at them and say, boy, God can do some great stuff through them, right? Why? How many of you feel absolutely helpless without Jesus? How many of you realize, thank you, do you know you're hopeless without him too? There is no hope for you, for anyone else in the world, if Jesus doesn't take himself and introduce himself into your circumstances. If you don't have Jesus in your life, there is no hope for you. But what's the problem? We think we're all right. We think we can get by on talent. We think we can fake it to make it. We think we got it all together. America's terrible about this. We don't think we need nobody else to tell. You can't tell me nothing. What are you going to tell me? I know. Work with teenagers. Try to coach them. You can't tell them nothing. They got it all together. They have all the answers already. How's God going to use that? If can't nobody tell you anything, how's God going to say anything to you? How is God going to use you? How is God going to impart his will into your life? What does it take to really, truly be a servant of God? You have to come to the place in your life where you're broken before him because you realize you're helpless and hopeless without him. Some of you, like me, have struggled with addiction, and we've talked before. And I say to you, you know, one of the reasons I don't think God uses me in recovery ministries is because of my attitude about things. But my thought is this: ain't nobody ever served Jesus properly until they got to the bottom of their barrel and realized they were helpless and hopeless without him. As long as you're resting in your own power and capability, you will not ever be an unbelievable apostle for Jesus because you're still trying to do it. You're still trying to what? Pass the problem on to somebody else. You're still trying to raise the funds yourself. You're still trying to identify the resources and figure out how you're going to do it. You tracking? Ain't nobody ever truly fallen in love with Jesus and be filled and used by him until they got to the bottom of the barrel and realized no matter how talented I am, how good I am, how pretty, how smart, how whatever else, or the opposite, I am helpless and hopeless without Jesus. I can do nothing for him unless I surrender myself completely and fully to him. I got to give him something to bless, and that's something that blesses me. What God blesses, he breaks. If you've never been broken before God, he ain't using you. That's on you. But you're going to choose today whether or not to do that. Here's another thing. Why do we allow ourselves to be broken for God? Why would he do that? What's he going to do next? Well, the miracle filled all the people. Do you love everybody? I mean, seriously, do you have love for everybody? Would you like to see Jesus just absolutely knock the socks off of the world and change our whole world as we know it? If for no other reason but for selfish reasons, are y'all happy with the world we live in? Wouldn't you like for it to be a little bit better? Well, look at it at least like that until God changes your heart and you realize you ought to be doing it just because you love him, he loves you unconditionally, you need to love his people. But until then, fake it till you make it. Because if you'll just allow him to break you and be the conduit for his power, the whole world will be blessed. Or they'll have the opportunity. Everybody on that hill that day ate until they were full. Jesus didn't leave anybody out, but he used the apostles to do it. You can be used like that if you're broken before him. Jesus overcomes all obstacles. He overcomes their doubt. He overcomes their debt. He overcomes their lack of resources. He overcame all those things, and he worked a miracle that day through them. Here's another thing. There was no waste in the miracle. No waste. Here's another great thing. There was a basket in this miracle. There was a basket for each of the apostles to carry. When they walked away from this thing, they walked away from their hands full with evidence of the mercies and miracles of God. He filled their cup to overflowing, and they saw it. You ever seen God miraculously work in your life? If you ain't sure, he hasn't. But I'd like to walk away from Jesus with a basket full up with crackers and sardines to prove what he just did, because I was willing to be broken before him. Here's the last one. Some of y'all are going to sit there and you're already negotiating in your mind. I know how it works. I'm like that. I'm a control freak. I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. I want to color outside the lines. What are you talking about this? Jesus can only be king on his terms. You don't get to say. You don't get to say how Jesus is going to be king of your life. So why should we trust him with that? Don't you think you can trust Jesus? Don't you think he'll take better care of your life than you've been taking of it? Huh? I don't know where the bottom of the barrel is for you, but I can tell you for me it was low. I had to end up homeless, sick, pretty much dying. And that still didn't do it. But the moment I reached the bottom of my barrel and I realized that without Jesus I was nothing and I was hopeless and helpless without him, he was able to come into my life and begin using me to the degree which I let him. That's a day by day, minute by minute, instant by instant proposition. We don't get to be broken today and live on that for a while. We got to be broken every day. You don't get to choose how Jesus is going to be king of your life. He's only going to be king on his